Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time we're taking a look at an excerpt from a science fiction novel called Covent Garden Time Slip, by Paul Elms Bacardi.
Yeah.
And get ready for some twists and turns because we're dealing with time travel, mystery, and even questions about what makes us us when the past comes back to haunt us.
Yeah, what really got me about this excerpt is how it takes time travel. And instead of just using it as like a plot device, it actually uses it to explore
Uh,
the very nature of identity. Like what happens when you run into a past version of yourself, someone who's basically frozen in time while you've like aged and changed.
Okay, so let's break this down.
Yeah.
The story takes place in London, 2025. Our main character, John, is an investigator for this organization called the Directorate, which kind of reminds me of like the Time Variance Authority from Loki. They're basically the time police, making sure that nobody messes with the timeline.
It's a really smart setup because like right away it shows you what's at stake in this world. Messing with time. It's not just some harmless experiment. It's like a serious crime with consequences that could like change the entire universe.
So John gets sent to Covent Garden, this place that's full of history,
Huh?
to apprehend a suspect. Sounds pretty routine,
Right.
But the moment he gets there, things get really weird.
The way the author describes John's disorientation is just so vivid. Imagine walking into a place you know, but it's like you stepped into an old photograph from decades ago. The excerpt mentions specific details about Covent Garden in the 1990s, like the shops, the colors. It's like the air itself is heavy with nostalgia.
Yeah, it's like that feeling you get when you hear a song from your childhood,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're transported back to that moment. But for John, it's not just a feeling. He actually comes face to face with his ex-girlfriend, Hannah. And she looks exactly the same as she did when they were dating back in the 90s.
It's a total classic time travel trope, but the Bacardi really does it well. You get this heart-stopping moment where Hannah recognizes John instantly. But of course, he looks way older to her. She even says, and I'm quoting here, "Is that you, John? You look older." Talk about an awkward reunion.
Oh man, the dramatic irony is so thick you could cut it with a time-traveling knife. John has to pretend he doesn't know her, even though they were in a serious relationship. Can you imagine having to act like you don't know someone you were once close to? All because of some time travel mishap.
This whole scenario just raises so many questions about the paradoxes of time travel. Like John being in the past could be causing a ripple effect. Changing his own timeline and memories, could he actually be on the verge of erasing himself from existence, like creating some kind of bootstrap paradox?
Hold on, a bootstrap paradox. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. Oh, it's super interesting. Imagine you travel back in time and teach a younger version of yourself a song. Then you grow up always believing that you wrote that song. But the truth is, it was brought back from the future by you. So then the question becomes, where did the song really come from? Who actually created it?
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So you're saying, in John's case, if he changes something in the past, that very change could be what leads to his time-traveling mission in the first place. It's enough to make your head spin.
Exactly. And this is where the excerpt gets really deep into the philosophical and psychological parts of time travel. John isn't just dealing with some temporal anomaly, he's facing the very core of who he is. A man caught between two versions of himself.
So then what happens? John's in this crazy situation,
Yeah.
trying to do his job, shocked from seeing Hannah, and maybe even facing the unraveling of his own reality.
Well, he makes a decision that throws another wrench into things. He decides to take Hannah with him.
He does. Why would he do that?
That's the cliffhanger that takes us into the next part of our deep dive. John's obviously determined to figure out what's going on, both for his own sanity and to protect the timeline. But by taking Hannah with him, he might be dragging her into this whole temporal mess, which brings up a whole new set of ethical and philosophical questions.
So John's decided to bring Hannah along. I don't even know how you'd begin to explain something like this. Like, hey, by the way, you've been stuck in time for like 30 years,
Yeah, the excerpt doesn't really go into detail about that conversation,
Yeah.
but you can definitely feel the tension there. All those things they're not saying to each other. It's interesting, though, because it kind of makes you think about a bigger question. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, would you? And how would that change who you become?
Right. It's like that saying, never meet your heroes, except in this case. It's more like never meet your past self. You might completely shatter the image you have of who you used to be.
Totally. And I think this excerpt is going beyond just being a time travel adventure story. It's using this crazy situation to look at something that's very real, that human struggle of trying to make sense of our past selves and who we are now.
So they're dealing with this incredibly strange situation,
Yeah.
but also these really deep existential questions. I wonder if John even knows what's going on, or if he's just as lost as Hannah is.
Well, based on what we see of John's thoughts, he's starting to suspect that he's somehow involved in the very crime he's supposed to be investigating. He keeps saying things like, the past and present were colliding, almost like he's realizing that he's not just observing time anymore, he's part of the chaos.
Okay, wait, let's talk about this directorate again for a second.
Sure.
They're supposed to be the protectors of the timeline,
Mm.
right? So wouldn't they have some kind of plan for this kind of situation, like a what to do when you accidentally time slip someone manual?
You've got a point there. We don't get a ton of information about the Directorate in the excerpt, but it seems like they have some pretty advanced technology and a deep understanding of how time works. So it makes you wonder, if they have that much control over time, how are these slips happening in the first place?
Are you thinking maybe there's a conspiracy here? Like maybe someone within the directorate is manipulating time for their own reasons?
Now that's a theory worth considering. It wouldn't be the first time in science fiction that the organization meant to maintain control becomes the source of the problem. But the excerpt doesn't give us any definite answers. It focuses more on how the time slip affects John and Hannah personally, leaving the inner workings of the Directorate a mystery.
Which, to be honest, makes it even more interesting. We're right there with John and Hannah.
Yeah.
Feeling the confusion, the fear, the feeling that everything around them is constantly changing. It's not just about the mechanics of time travel, it's about the emotional and psychological impact it has.
And this brings up a really important question about time travel stories. Are we dealing with a fixed timeline where everything is predetermined, or a branching timeline where every change creates a new alternate reality?
Oh, that's a good one. Because if it's a fixed timeline, then John's actions are already part of the plan, and there's no escaping his destiny. But if it's a branching timeline,
Yeah.
well, that opens up a whole world of possibilities.
Exactly. John choosing to bring Hannah with him could have huge consequences, creating a ripple that changes not just their lives, but maybe even the entire course of history.
That butterfly effect thing.
Yeah, right.
One small change in the past can lead to massive,
Yeah,
unpredictable changes in the future.
precisely. And that's what makes time travel such a fascinating and enduring topic. It taps into our deepest fears about choice, consequence, and the very nature of reality. It forces us to ask ourselves, do we really have free will, or are we just passengers on a predetermined journey through time?
So we've got John and Hannah potentially changing history with every move they make. We've got this mysterious directorate, seemingly in control but somehow failing to prevent these time slips. And we've got this fundamental question about time itself. Where do we go from here?
Well, in the last part of the excerpt, it seems like John's determined to get to the bottom of this whole thing. He thinks that if he can understand what caused the time slip, he can somehow fix it. Whether that's even possible, and what the consequences might be, is something we'll have to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're at the end of our journey into Covent Garden Time Slip, and things are getting pretty intense. John's determined to fix this time slip, but what does fixing even mean in a situation like this? Can you really undo the past without causing even more paradoxes?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? The excerpt doesn't really give us any clear answers, but it does give us some interesting hints. Remember that line John keeps repeating, the past and present were colliding? It's like he can sense that the line between these two times is blurring, that they're kind of merging into one unstable reality.
It's like when you're in a dream, and you know you're dreaming, but you just can't wake up. You're stuck in this weird in-between place, and the normal rules don't apply anymore.
That's a great comparison. And in a way, John is experiencing a kind of waking dream. He's physically in the past, but his memories, his experiences, everything that makes him him, are rooted in the future. He's a walking paradox, a man out of sync with his own timeline.
So if he's a walking paradox, does that mean he's the one who caused the time slip? Is it just his presence that's messing up the flow of time?
That's one possibility that the excerpt suggests, but it doesn't say for sure. There's this feeling that there's a bigger mystery going on, something that John doesn't fully understand. Remember the Directorate? We were talking about how they might be more involved than they seem, like maybe someone within the organization is manipulating time for their own agenda.
Oh, yeah. So maybe John isn't the reason for the time slip, but he's somehow caught in the middle of a much bigger time game. He's like a pawn being moved around by forces he can't even see.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that fundamental question about free will versus destiny. Does John have any control over what's happening to him, or is he just playing out a role that's already been written? Is he in charge of his own fate, or is he just a puppet of time?
It makes you wonder about everything you thought you knew about cause and effect. If time can be messed with, then what does that say about our choices, our actions, our lives? Are we all just living out a script that's already been written?
That's a question philosophers have been trying to answer for centuries, and this excerpt doesn't give us any easy answers. But what it does really well is show us how these abstract ideas affect real people. We see how time travel impacts John and Hannah emotionally as they try to make sense of a reality that's constantly changing around them.
It makes you think about what the author Paul Elms Bacardi is trying to say about our relationship with time. Is it something we can master and control, or is it a force that's ultimately beyond our grasp?
Maybe it's a bit of both. The Directorate, with their advanced technology and strict rules, represents our desire to control time to make it predictable and manageable. But the time slip itself, this burst of chaos into their carefully ordered timeline, suggests that time is ultimately a wild and untamable thing.
So even with all our technology and all our attempts to understand and control it, time is still this mysterious and elusive thing capable of bending and breaking the rules in ways we can't predict.
And that's the beauty of this excerpt and of science fiction in general. It lets us explore these mind-blowing ideas to push the limits of our imagination and think about the possibilities both amazing and scary.
Covent Garden Time Slip has given us a lot to think about the nature of identity, the paradoxes of time travel, and whether we really have any control over our own destinies. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it, making you look at the world and your place in it in a whole new way. If you're looking for a thought-provoking and mind-bending read, we highly recommend checking out the full novel.
And as always, we encourage you to keep the conversation going. What are your thoughts on time travel? Do you think it's possible? What would you do if you came face to face with a past version of yourself? Share your ideas, your theories, your wildest thoughts, and let's keep exploring this together.
Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the universe, both real and imagined.